Have you ever looked at your life and thought, why is it always me? Why does it feel like I'm carrying something heavier than everyone else, even when no one sees it? Why do I feel like I'm fighting battles no one around me understands, even though I'm not doing anything wrong? You watch others seem to glide through life. Doors open for them, friendships flow, things just work. But for you, even the basics feel like a war. And maybe, deep inside, you've whispered the question, am I cursed? Am I broken? Number, you're not cursed. You're chosen. And being chosen doesn't come with applause. It comes with weight. A different kind of weight. A hidden kind of burden that the world can't measure. Because it's not on your back. It's in your soul. You've been marked, set apart. Not for comfort, but for calling. And when heaven places that kind of purpose on a life, the process becomes intense. Your steps get heavier not because you're lost, but because you're carrying destiny. The truth is, being chosen isn't glamorous. It's gritty. It means walking roads where others don't follow, because they can't hear what you hear. It means feeling deeply, sensing things before they happen, being moved by things that others ignore. It means living with a constant sense that something greater is pulling you forward, even if you can't fully explain it. And because of that unseen pull, life doesn't feel normal. You don't get to take shortcuts. You don't get the luxury of coasting. You don't even get to blend in, even when you try. There's a fire in you that won't let you settle, a whisper that won't let you quit. And even when you feel tired, even when you break down in tears alone, there's something inside you that always pulls you back to your feet. That something is your calling. But that calling comes with weight, and that weight comes with pain. Pain that no one else sees. Pain that doesn't make sense on the outside. You're not always suffering outwardly. It's internal, it's spiritual, it's mental. You could be laughing at a dinner table, and inside your spirit is groaning. You could be performing at your job, showing up for your friends, getting things done, and still feel like a piece of you is screaming for rest, for understanding, for breakthrough. That's the pain of the chosen. It's the pain of carrying something no one else sees, being pregnant with a future you can't yet touch, and feeling like no one around you even notices you're in labor. What hurts the most is the silence. The kind of silence where you want to scream to the world, do you see me? Do you see what I'm going through? But you don't. You stay silent. You smile. You nod. You keep it together. Because deep down, you know the people around you wouldn't get it anyway. How could they? You were set apart before you were born, and with that comes an invisible weight. The kind of weight only those marked by God ever feel. You're not crazy. You're not too emotional. You're not too intense. You are just not ordinary. You were built for something eternal. And that means you will never feel completely comfortable in temporary things. That's why you wrestle. That's why you feel out of place. That's why you always feel like you're being stretched, tested, refined. It's because you are. And it's not to break you. It's to build something unshakable in you. But before God ever reveals the greatness He placed in you, He allows you to feel the full pressure of carrying it. And that's why, when others are resting, you're still up. When others are partying, you're thinking. When others are sleeping, you're praying. There is something different about you. And the difference isn't always easy to live with, but it is real. And the more you resist it, the heavier life feels. But when you start to accept it, even in tears, even in pain, something shifts. You begin to realize, maybe I wasn't meant to fit in. Maybe I wasn't meant to be understood. Maybe I'm not crazy for feeling this much. Maybe I'm chosen. And that changes everything. Because once you understand you're chosen, you stop trying to be validated by people who were never assigned to see your value. You stop begging for inclusion in places where your light was always going to expose darkness. You stop shrinking to be digestible. You stop apologizing for your fire. You realize that the pressure isn't proof that something's wrong with you. It's confirmation that something powerful is being birthed through you. And the very things that made you feel like an outsider are the same things that God will use to set you apart as a leader, a voice, a vessel. And this leads to something even deeper, something that stings in a different way. The pain of being misunderstood. Not by strangers, but by the people closest to you. You try to explain the weight you're carrying, and they shrug it off. You share what you feel God is telling you, and they look confused or change the subject. You talk about what's stirring in your heart, and they say you're overthinking or being too spiritual. And so, over time, you stop sharing. You smile and nod and keep the deepest parts of you locked away, because you've learned that not everyone has the language for what God is doing inside you. This pain, it hits harder than most, because all you want is to be seen, to be heard, to be understood. But when you're chosen, you often become invisible to those who are spiritually blind. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because your vision intimidates those who have none. Your passion feels foreign to those who are living casually. Your faith makes them uncomfortable. Your standard convicts them. So instead of embracing you, they question you. Instead of supporting you, they distance themselves. And it hurts. It cuts deep. Because these are the people you thought would be in your corner, cheering you on, walking with you, lifting your arms when you feel weak. But instead, you find yourself walking alone. And yet this too is part of the shaping. Being misunderstood pushes you toward God in ways nothing else can. It strips away the noise and forces you to sit in the silence with Him. And that's when you begin to hear Him more clearly. You start to realize that the reason others can't understand your calling is because it wasn't given to them. It was given to you. You're the one who has to carry it. You're the one who has to nurture it. You're the one who has to walk it out, even when no one claps, even when no one gets it, even when you doubt it yourself. The most anointed people in history were misunderstood in their own homes, rejected by their own towns, betrayed by those they trusted most. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. But what sets the chosen apart isn't their ability to be understood. It's their ability to keep going when they're not, to keep believing when others laugh, to keep building when others walk away, to keep obeying even when it costs them comfort, relationships, and reputation. Because deep down, they know what's on the other side of this pain is worth every tear. And that's why even in your loneliness, your doubt, your silence, you're still here, still pushing, still holding on. Because you were made for this, not to be admired, not to be famous, but to be faithful. You're not here by accident. And this pain, it's not pointless, it's proof. You are chosen. And chosen ones carry the cost before they ever walk in the reward. There's a kind of war that no one sees, a battle that happens entirely within the walls of your own soul. It doesn't show up in your smile. It doesn't appear in your schedule. It doesn't make headlines, but it is relentless. It's the battle between who you are and who you're called to be, between your spirit and your flesh, between your purpose and your past, between the version of you that heaven sees and the version of you that the world keeps trying to pull back into. And if you're chosen, you feel this battle in ways that others simply don't. Because for you, sin doesn't feel casual. Distractions aren't just annoying, they're dangerous. One wrong step and you can feel your entire spirit grieve. You sense it in the atmosphere. You feel it in your chest. It's like walking a tightrope every day between peace and chaos. And that tension is exhausting. You get up with the intention to pray, and your mind is flooded with everything but the words you want to say. You open the word, hoping for clarity, and suddenly your phone buzzes. Your mind drifts. Your heart dulls. You promise God, this time I'll stay consistent, and 3 days later you're already battling guilt. You start a fast with passion, And by lunchtime, your cravings scream louder than your commitment. And the worst part, you know better. You know what's at stake. That's what makes it hurt more. This isn't the ignorance of someone who's never known God. This is the guilt of someone who's tasted his presence, who's heard his voice, who's felt his power, and still stumbles, still struggles, still falls. And the shame that follows feels like a storm, violent, sudden, and paralyzing. You start to question if you're even worthy of this calling, if maybe God made a mistake choosing someone like you. But he didn't. That's what the enemy doesn't want you to realize, that this war inside you isn't a sign of failure, it's a sign of life. It means your spirit is still alive. It means your conscience is still soft. It means the Holy Spirit hasn't left you. He's fighting with you. You see, people who are spiritually dead don't wrestle with these things. They don't feel that sting when they fall. They don't care when they compromise. But you do. And that pain, that grief, is actually grace. It's a reminder that you're still in the fight, that you haven't given up, that even on your worst day, the battle is proof you still belong to God. Even the Apostle Paul, who wrote most of the New Testament, cried out in frustration over this same battle. What I want to do, I don't do. But what I hate, that's what I keep doing. This wasn't a new believer talking. This was a spiritual giant, which means your struggle doesn't disqualify you. It authenticates you. It shows that you're not faking your faith. You're not going through the motions. You're actually trying. You're actually fighting. And yes, the flesh still whispers. It finds loopholes. It makes excuses. It tells you, just once more, or it's not that serious, or everyone else does it. But the Spirit cries out. And that cry, no matter how faint, is your lifeline. That cry is what keeps pulling you back again and again to the foot of the cross. And make no mistake, the more you step into your calling, the more aggressive this battle becomes. The enemy doesn't waste his best tactics on people with no impact. He saves the heaviest fire for those carrying the heaviest anointing. That's why it feels like your temptations are personalized, tailored, targeted. He knows your weak spots. He studies your patterns. If you're called to speak truth, he attacks your confidence and fills your mouth with lies. If you're called to lead, he'll tempt you with pride or comparison. If you're anointed to heal others, he'll try to keep you emotionally wounded and unavailable. Because if he can't destroy you outright, he'll distract you with internal warfare until you're too exhausted to move forward. But what he didn't expect is that you would keep showing up, that even with a storm inside, you would still press into God, that even when you feel unworthy, you still lift your hands, that even in failure, you still come back to grace. And it's that, not perfection, not performance, but that raw, desperate hunger for God that sets the chosen apart. That is what fuels your next level. That is what refines your soul. And eventually, you start to see the battle differently. You stop being surprised by it. You stop letting it define you. And instead, you start using it. You let it humble you. You let it remind you that you need grace daily. You let it drive you deeper into dependence. Because that's the secret. The power of the chosen doesn't come from strength. It comes from surrender. And while you're fighting this private war, another painful reality begins to emerge. Something that doesn't show up as loud, but cuts just as deep. The silence. Not just from people, but sometimes from God. You've cried out. You've fasted. You've stayed faithful. And yet the heavens seem still. You're not asking for riches or fame. You just want to hear him again. You just want a sign, a word, a whisper that lets you know you're still on the right path. But all you get is quiet. And in that quiet, the enemy gets louder. He tells you God has forgotten, that your prayers didn't matter, that the vision was just your imagination, that maybe you missed your moment. And even though part of you knows it's a lie, another part starts to wonder, what if it's true? The silence of God is one of the heaviest tests the chosen face, not because he's gone, but because he's growing something in you that silence alone can produce. Faith that doesn't depend on feelings, obedience that doesn't need constant reassurance, trust that walks even when the path is dark. In the noise, you learn to respond, but in the silence, you learn to endure. And endurance is what separates those who are called from those who are chosen. Anyone can believe when the presence is tangible. But what about when it's not? What about when you worship through tears? What about when you keep going, even when everything in you wants to stop? That's when your roots grow deep. That's when your soul matures. That's when heaven watches and says, now they're ready. Because the wilderness isn't a punishment, it's a proving ground. And the delay isn't a denial, it's preparation. God is not ignoring you. He's refining you, building you, stripping away everything that's not strong enough to carry what he's about to place on your life. And when the time is right, when the fire has finished its work, when your heart has been fully surrendered, he will speak again. And this time, you'll be ready to carry what you once could only dream about. So don't be fooled by the silence. Don't mistake the struggle for failure. The chosen walk a different path. And yes, it's harder. Yes, it's lonelier, but it's holy. And what's being formed in you, through your battles, through your silence, through your tears, is far more valuable than anything you could gain in comfort. You are not weak. You are not abandoned. You are being prepared. And when the preparation is complete, the doors that open won't just bless you, they'll change everything around you. Keep walking, even in the war, especially in the silence. Because God isn't done, he's just getting started. There's a kind of pain that pierces deeper than most people talk about. It's not the pain of a wound you saw coming, but the pain of someone you loved, walking away without explanation. One day you're close, sharing dreams, building trust, laughing, depending on them. And the next, it's like they don't see you anymore. They don't call, they don't check in, they don't ask how you're doing. You replay every conversation, wondering what went wrong, searching your memory for something you said, something you did. And there's nothing. Just silence. Just distance. And a part of you aches because you thought this person would be there for the long haul. You thought they saw your heart. But now they're gone, and you're left holding the space they used to fill. This is one of the quietest sufferings of being chosen. The unexpected, unexplainable loss of people who once felt like home. And it doesn't just happen once. It happens in waves. Every time you level up spiritually, someone exits. Every time you get serious about God, someone grows distant. And it starts to feel personal, like maybe there's something wrong with you. But there isn't. What's happening isn't rejection, it's refinement. God isn't punishing you. He's protecting what he's placed in you. He's preserving your destiny by filtering your circle. Not everyone can handle your light. Not everyone can walk at your pace. Not everyone has the capacity to stand next to someone who is marked by God. Because here's the truth. The more you draw near to God, the more you will repel people who are comfortable in compromise. Your hunger for purpose exposes their apathy. Your passion for purity challenges their excuses. Your fire confronts their comfort. And rather than face their own reflection, they distance themselves from you. That hurts, deeply, because all you wanted was to grow, not outgrow them. All you wanted was to be real, not be rejected. But when God has chosen you for something uncommon, He will not allow you to stay surrounded by common environments. Think about it. When you started praying more, when you decided to fast, when you broke old habits and started walking in obedience, that's when people began fading. That's when the texts stopped, the invites stopped, the energy shifted, and you were left wondering why. Why now? Why them? But now you see, it wasn't random, it was strategic, it was spiritual. God was doing what you couldn't. He was removing what would have become an anchor. He was protecting your anointing. And he was forcing you to learn one of the most painful, powerful lessons the chosen ever learn. Not everyone who starts with you is meant to finish with you. Sometimes it's the very people you loved the most who become the ones who cannot follow where God is taking you. Not because they're bad, not because you're better, but because their season in your life has served its purpose. And that purpose may have been to teach, to stretch, to reveal, but not to remain. And the more you resist letting them go, the heavier your walk becomes. Because what feels like love to you may be disobedience to God. There are some people who were meant to be part of your story, but not part of your future. And as painful as it is to accept, every chapter has its own cast. When God turns the page, he often changes the characters. That's why when you step into a new level of obedience, rejection often follows. The people who once supported you start questioning your motives. The ones who used to praise you begin to criticize you. And you're left asking, why now? Because now, you've stepped into territory that threatens the status quo. Now, your presence isn't just inspiring, it's convicting. You don't even have to say anything. Your very existence becomes a reminder of what they're not willing to change. Your choices confront theirs. Your fire makes their lukewarm feel cold. And so, they choose the easy way out. They leave. But don't chase them. Don't beg them to stay. Don't explain yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. If God allowed them to go, it's because they were not meant to walk into the next door with you. And trust this, what he removes, he always replaces. Not with duplicates, but with divine connections. People who see you for who you really are. People who don't need endless explanations to understand your spirit. People who challenge you to grow, not guilt you for it. But those people can't come if you're still clinging to what God already released. Letting go may feel like loss, but it's actually preparation, a divine reset. And the people who truly belong in your destiny, they won't need to be convinced to stay. They'll recognize your calling and run with you. And while the pain of rejection cuts deep, there's another kind of pain that follows closely behind it. The pain of renunciation. The chosen life is not just about what you receive. It's about what you're willing to release. What you're willing to surrender, even when it looks good. Even when it feels good. Even when the world tells you to hold on to it. See, some of the hardest decisions you'll ever make as someone chosen by God won't be between good and bad. They'll be between good and God. Between what looks right and what is right. Between what makes sense and what aligns with your purpose. And sometimes, the thing you have to walk away from isn't toxic. It's just not timed for where God is leading you. There's a real pain in letting go of things you once prayed for. The relationship you thought was forever. The opportunity that looked like a blessing. The job that provided comfort but killed your calling. The friend who felt like family but couldn't carry your vision. And these aren't obvious sins. These are the subtle sacrifices, the ones no one claps for, the ones that people question you for, the ones that leave you crying in private, asking God, why would you give me this only to ask me to release it? But what you have to understand is that when you're chosen, obedience matters more than logic. And there will be times when God asks you to give up something good because it would get in the way of something greater. He asked Abraham to leave everything familiar, not because where he was living was evil, but because it wasn't his destiny. He asked Moses to walk away from the palace, not because Egypt didn't offer privilege, but because it wasn't his purpose. Over and over again, we see the pattern. Before elevation comes separation. Before the promise is fulfilled, something must be laid down. And for the chosen, this is a recurring cycle. You outgrow things faster. Your spirit becomes more sensitive. What once felt fine now feels heavy. Shows, music, habits, conversations. The Holy Spirit begins to press on areas that others still enjoy, and you're left feeling like a stranger in your own world. That's not you becoming rigid. That's you becoming refined. Renunciation isn't a punishment. It's proof of transformation. It's the pruning that leads to fruit. And while it's not easy, it's necessary. Because every yes to God requires a no to something else. You can't walk into the fullness of your calling while dragging yesterday's baggage. You can't carry both the cross and your ego. You can't cling to the familiar and still move forward in faith. And the longer you delay obedience, the heavier life will feel. But the moment you surrender, fully, completely, that's when the weight lifts. That's when peace returns. That's when clarity hits. Because in letting go, you've made room for the divine. Some people won't understand your decisions. Some will call you extreme. Some will say you're missing out. But what they don't see is the internal war you've already fought. They don't know the midnight prayers, the sleepless nights, the deep conviction that won't let you compromise. And that's okay. You're not living for their approval. You're living for alignment. And as you continue to walk this path, you'll begin to see every sacrifice had a purpose. Every release made space. Every goodbye became a gate. And while it may not always feel good, it is always worth it. The chosen don't live easy lives. They live surrendered ones. And surrender will always cost you something. But what you gain in return, peace, clarity, power, presence, is something this world could never give you. So if you're in the middle of that tearing, that pruning, that uncomfortable letting go, don't run. Don't resist. This is what refining looks like. And what's on the other side of this obedience is everything you were born to carry. There's a weight that doesn't come from failure or loss, but from expectation, from responsibility, from knowing you're called, and knowing that because of that, you don't get to break the way others do. You don't get to collapse. You don't get to fall apart in public. The moment you show weakness, people question your calling. The moment you show emotion, they doubt your anointing. And so over time, you learn to wear strength like armor. You smile when you're tired. You show up when you're empty. You carry others even when you secretly need someone to carry you. You learn to lead through tears, to speak while wounded, to inspire when your own hope is hanging by a thread. And this becomes your unspoken reality. You're expected to be strong, not because you feel strong, but because others draw their strength from you. The chosen ones don't just feel pressure from the outside. They carry pressure from the inside, the weight of vision, the urgency of purpose, the constant burden of knowing that your life isn't just about you, that every decision you make ripples beyond your own story, that every step you take either aligns with destiny or delays it. And that's a kind of pressure no one sees, no one celebrates, but it's always there. A quiet storm that lives behind your smile, a fire in your bones that won't let you rest. Even when you try to slow down, something in you says, there's more. Even when you want to disconnect, something in you whispers, don't quit. Not now. You want to escape the weight. But the moment you consider it, you're reminded, you were born for this. And that thought alone brings both peace and pain. Because let's be honest, there are days when you're tired of being strong, tired of carrying everyone else, tired of pretending like you're okay. You scroll past people who seem carefree, unbothered, laughing without a thought about purpose. And you wonder what it would feel like to live without this burden, to not be so spiritually alert, to not wake up with the weight of vision. But you know you can't go back. You've seen too much, felt too much, been marked too deeply. You can't turn off the calling, even if you wanted to. And while others get to live casually, you live with a constant pull towards something deeper. It's exhausting, it's lonely, but it's real. And what makes it harder is that no one claps for private strength. No one sees the tears you wipe before walking into the room. No one notices the battles you fight before delivering the word. No one celebrates the demons you defeat in silence. But heaven sees. Heaven records every hidden victory, every silent surrender, every time you chose faith over fear, trust over control, purpose over comfort. And while the applause of man may be absent, the approval of God resounds louder than any crowd. He knows how heavy the mantle is, and he never placed it on your shoulders to crush you. He placed it there because he knew what you carried inside. And so, even in your weakness, he continues to call you forward. Even in your questions, he continues to speak. Because he doesn't need your perfection. He needs your perseverance. He doesn't expect you to never cry. He just asks that you don't quit. He knows you're tired, but he also knows what's on the other side of this test. He knows the weight will not break you, it will build you. And every moment you choose to keep going, to show up, to trust, to believe, you're stepping closer to the version of yourself he already sees. But there's another danger in this walk that few talk about. The temptation to silence the divine in order to be accepted by the human, to shrink yourself, to dial back your fire, to blend in just enough to avoid standing out. Because the chosen don't just face pressure to be strong, they face pressure to fit in. And over time, that pressure can start to feel heavier than your calling. You get tired of being the spiritual one, tired of always being the deep one, the serious one, the one people look at sideways when you speak truth. You start to wonder if it would be easier to just be normal, to soften your convictions, to keep your dreams to yourself, to go along with the crowd. And if you're not careful, you'll begin to downplay your assignment to maintain connection. You'll trade authenticity for belonging. You'll sacrifice your edge just to be accepted. And that's a slow death. Because every time you suppress your calling to make others comfortable, you lose a part of yourself. Every time you swallow your convictions, your spirit grows quieter. Every time you say yes to people but no to God, your fire dims just a little more. Until one day, you wake up and wonder where your passion went, where your vision went, where you went. This is the danger of shrinking. It never stays small. It consumes. It kills dreams. It muffles anointings. And worst of all, it leaves you surrounded by people who like the version of you that God never made. But even then, even if you've fallen into that, grace calls you back. The beautiful thing about being chosen is that God never stops chasing you. Even when you've silenced his voice, he still whispers. Even when you've muted your purpose, he still stirs. He won't let you rest in places you were never meant to settle. He will make you uncomfortable in comfort zones. He will frustrate your peace in places you were never supposed to find it. Why? Because there's still more. There's still oil in you. There's still fire on your life. And he's not done with you yet. You see, being chosen means carrying pressure, yes. But it also means carrying promise. And the two always go hand in hand. The pressure reminds you of what you're carrying. The promise reminds you of where you're going. And if you can hold on to both, if you can press through the pressure without forfeiting the promise, you will step into a level of influence, of anointing, of impact that cannot be explained by natural means. You will become someone who didn't just survive the fire, but came out refined, unshaken, and filled with glory. That's why the pressure is real. because the purpose is real, and God only refines what He intends to reveal. So if you're in a season where you feel like everything is pressing on you at once, your mind, your spirit, your body, your emotions, understand this. It's not to crush you. It's to show you what's really inside you. Diamonds are revealed through pressure. Oil is released through crushing. And glory is born through fire. What you're feeling is not punishment. It's prophecy. The weight is confirmation that you're carrying something sacred. And when it finally comes forth, when the vision is birthed, the doors open, the favor is released, you'll look back and realize every ounce of pressure was worth it. And so you continue. You continue to walk even when your legs are shaking. You continue to believe even when your faith feels fragile. You continue to carry the weight, not because it's easy, but because it's eternal. Because deep down, you know, I may be tired, I may be stretched, I may be misunderstood, but I'm chosen. And chosen ones don't just endure pressure, they rise under it. They become everything they were born to be, not in spite of the pain, but because of it. There comes a moment, usually quiet, often alone, when everything starts to make sense, but not in the way you expected. It's not the kind of clarity that comes with answers. It's the kind that comes after enough pain, enough endurance, enough silence, that you finally see the pattern. You look back and realize it was all connected. Every delay, every closed door, every lonely night, every time someone walked away, every inner battle, every tear no one saw, every step you thought was a detour. It was all part of the same blueprint. Not a punishment, not a mistake, a process. And suddenly, you stop asking, why me? And you start saying, now I understand. Not fully, but enough to keep going. Enough to stop resenting the fire and start respecting what it's producing in you. That's the hidden gift inside all of this. You begin to realize that the very things that once felt like burdens were actually the tools God was using to shape your soul. The rejection taught you how to stand without applause. The isolation taught you how to hear His voice with no outside noise. The pressure taught you how to walk in purpose without relying on comfort. The battles inside your mind taught you how to war in prayer. You didn't know it then. But the fire wasn't burning you, it was forging you. Every struggle had a purpose. Every loss had a lesson. Every moment of weakness was a setup for supernatural strength. And now, you carry something that can't be learned in books or taught in classrooms. You carry depth. You carry weight. You carry the residue of someone who's been through the storm and still chose to trust. This is what makes the chosen different. They don't just have knowledge. They have scars. Scars that speak. Scars that carry power. Scars that say, I've been through something real, and I survived. But even more than survived, you became. And the beauty of it is, no one can take that from you. It wasn't given by man, and it can't be revoked by man. What was built in the secret place, through suffering and surrender, is now part of your spiritual DNA. And it qualifies you for something that titles and platforms never could: authentic authority. Because the chosen don't speak from theory, they speak from the furnace. They speak from experience. And that kind of voice? It cuts through the noise. It wakes up the sleeping. It pulls the broken out of darkness. Not because it's loud, but because it's real. You now carry a message that wasn't taught, it was earned. Through nights you didn't think you'd make it through. Through moments you questioned everything. Through seasons where the silence from heaven was so loud, it nearly broke your faith. And yet, here you are, still standing, still pressing, still believing, still becoming. And now, you're dangerous to the kingdom of darkness, because you're no longer living off hype. You're living off history with God. And no one can argue with your journey. No one can debate the path you've walked. You've felt the crushing, and you've come out with oil. And that's why you begin to walk differently. You don't panic like you used to. You don't question like you used to. You don't break the same way. Because you've been here before. You've learned how to carry pain and still walk in purpose. You've learned how to worship with wounds. You've learned how to serve while still healing. You've learned how to keep your eyes on the unseen, because you finally understand that the visible world is not your anchor. Your hope is tied to something eternal. You've learned how to live in the tension of not yet, and still move like it's already done. Because for the chosen, faith doesn't wait for perfect conditions. It creates the conditions. And now something else begins to happen. Something holy. Others start coming to you, not because you shouted the loudest, but because your life carries weight. They don't always know why they're drawn to you, but they feel it. They sense the peace, the clarity, the conviction, the depth. And when they open up, when they say things like, "I don't know why I'm telling you this," or "I've never said this to anyone," you'll know. This is what the pain was for. This is what the fire produced. You'll hold their heart in your hands and whisper, "I understand. I've been there." And you won't be speaking from sympathy. You'll be speaking from survival, from transformation. And your voice will carry healing because it's been filtered through fire. You will start to recognize others who are chosen. You'll spot it in their eyes, hear it in their tone. The ones who've walked through the deep. The ones who've learned to lean on God when everything else fell apart. And there will be no need for long explanations. You'll just know. Spirit recognizes spirit. And in those moments, there's a comfort that words can't explain. The comfort of realizing you're not alone. That others have been through the same dark valleys and came out with light. And when chosen ones connect, something powerful happens. Destiny starts to move faster. Purpose becomes clearer. And you begin to understand, this was never just about you. It was always about what God could do through you. Because there's a world full of people pretending to be okay, carrying weights they don't know how to name, drowning in silence, starved for something real. And you carry the antidote. You carry the authenticity. You carry the kind of presence that doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. The kind of presence that says, you're not crazy, you're not broken, you're chosen. And yes, it hurts, but it's producing something priceless. You become living proof that pain can be redeemed, that pressure can birth power, that rejection can redirect, that the fire that tried to destroy you was the same fire God used to define you. And so you stop chasing validation. You stop apologizing for your process. You stop explaining your journey to people who were never meant to understand it. You walk boldly, quietly, but boldly. Not with arrogance, but with authority. The kind that comes from knowing, not believing, not guessing, but knowing that you've been set apart, called, chosen. Not because you were the most qualified, not because you were perfect, but because you said yes when others said no. Because you kept walking when others gave up. Because you trusted even when you couldn't trace him. And now you see. It was worth it. Every tear, every battle, every lonely night, every time you kept going when it would have been easier to quit. It all had a purpose. It all had a promise. And you're just getting started. Because the pain was never the ending. It was the doorway. And now that you've walked through it, now that you've survived it, now that you've become what the fire couldn't destroy, you're ready. Ready to carry the weight of glory. Ready to walk in fullness. Ready to reach others who are still in their midnight hour and say with quiet conviction, hold on. The dawn is coming. You're not alone. You're chosen. And the best is still ahead.